Obviously, you are leaning on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, He'll direct your path. Self-exhaustion exposes human limitations. Have you ever thought that it is a good thing to be exhausted? That's a good thing. It's a good thing for us to learn the lack of our ability. Usually we begin in human strength with, I can handle it. I got it. I don't know if you're like me at all, but I just try harder. Pull my bootstraps up, get up earlier, work later. But there are times in life when we have to realize that this is going to have to be done, not in human strength, but we're going to have to pray and seek the God of heaven if this is going to be accomplished. God helps those who help themselves. Have you ever heard that? That is the arm of the flesh, man. And that secular humanistic psychology is piped into our mindsets. We are brainwashed. We just think if I work harder, if I had more intellect and ability and personality, and I push a little more, I'll make it happen. Self-exhaustion proves otherwise. Self-exhaustion is shown in Isaiah 40, verse 6, where God said, all flesh is as grass, and the grass withers, and the flesh perishes, but he that does the will of God abides forever. Jesus said in John 15:5, without me, you can do nothing. And God has to get us to that median point, where we truly realize that without God, I got nothing. My strength is finite. My wisdom is lacking and incapable. Until strength fails, dependence upon God feels optional. Feels optional. I'm going to tell you, God will never use a person He doesn't break. And God broke me hard one day. I'm telling you what. 28 years old in the hospital, diagnosed with cancer. I had nowhere to look but look up, look to God. From whence cometh my help cometh from the hills. I believe God will do that in your life at some point. You'll hit the wall with bankruptcy, or some crisis will take place, some family trial or issue. Moses had to learn this lesson, and so do we. That his strength that killed the Egyptian could not deliver Israel. You will never get there in the arm of your flesh. It won't happen. Self-exhaustion, it strips away self-confidence. We live in such a world that promotes confidence, promotes self-ability. Exhaustion helps humble us. That effort no longer produces results. Pride has nothing to lean upon. Ability gives way to need. God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble, James 4:6 says. Weakness becomes a doorway, not a dead end. And God's power is not attracted to self-sufficiency. We understand that our sufficiency is not of ourselves. Paul said in 2 Corinthians that when I am weak, then I am strong. Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, the Lord of hosts, Zechariah 4:6 says. So we understand that we must come to the end of ourselves. Jesus said, except the corn of wheat fall and die, it abides alone, but if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. And I think we all want much fruit with our lives to take place, but there has to be death. Death to self, death to our ambition in our flesh. Self-exhaustion teaches us God's pace. It's not running in our pace, it's running in God's pace, His strength. He leads me beside the still waters and He restores my soul. What it teaches is God's pace restores rather than drains. Midian slowed Moses down so God could build him up. You got to slow down. I've always said I'll slow down when I die, or, I'd rather burn out than rust out. I like to go get stuff, And I got to learn to wait upon the Lord because His timing's perfect. His ways are always right. Moses still had courage, leadership, and resolve, but at Midian he learned to submit that, redirect that, and be empowered by God's strength and in God's timing. The Lord is my strength and my song, he would say in Exodus 15:2. Strength that is surrendered, it's multiplied strength. Self-exhaustion, it teaches us what we're not. Reliance on God teaches us who He is. And God often drains our strength so that we will find Him sufficient, all sufficient. So I think here at the well, the very first scene we see at Midian, we see a lesson about exhaustion. He gets by this well, and God had a divine appointment for him in verse 16 and 17. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. Do you see the picture? Moses is sitting by a well. 7 sisters come up. Now these are siblings. They ranged in age from oldest to youngest. I would imagine Zipporah probably would have been the eldest daughter. They show up there to water their flocks, and while they're watering, these shepherds come and bully them away. Get out of here. Drove them away, and Moses stepped in. He defended these women. He helped them water their flock. Now, church, this event shows us that God opens doors through the heart of compassion. And Moses had compassion upon these ladies. He stepped in. He stepped up. I don't know how many shepherds there were, but there was plural. Shepherds normally weren't some cream puff, hands of silk men. These were rugged individuals. And Moses was willing to take on one versus however many. I think that shows a lot about his physical stature, that there was something about him that you didn't want to mess with him. But mind you, Moses spoke up for those that needed somebody to help them. And this is the very first time we see Moses being somewhat soft, somewhat shepherding. It really foreshadowed the greater plan and purpose that God had with Moses to shepherd God's people, that role that God would have. God was stirring up a deliverer in Moses' heart, and he was now able to express himself without violence. He was able to use his words. He was able to use his stature, not his fists, but his words. Now, for men, sometimes that can be a challenge, to learn to use words, the power of speaking, articulating what's going on in our minds and communicating that clearly. A lot of men just want to use their fists. Well, let's just take it outside, big boy. We'll settle this like men. Well, you could do that, and he tried that, and it didn't work. So now he's growing. You see Moses growing at Midian? Now he's using resolve, a friction, with conversation, with help, not with the arm of the flesh. Earlier in Egypt, Moses killed a man by force, and now here he uses strength and words to protect and to serve. Doing the right thing did not require a title. It did not require position, authority, or recognition. He acted righteously, courageously, and he was faithful in that which was right to do. Faithfulness in small unnoticed moments, no matter how little, God sees them and God rewards them. God trains His servants in everyday situations. Long before big public ministry would take place, God was preparing this man privately by a well. And by the way, you could do a great study on the wells of the Bible and what took place at the well, what took place at wells. It's fascinating how God used everyday situations and molded people and made people, and even the salvation of a Samaritan woman by a well. Yeah, John 4. We find that Moses intervened. Yes, he used courage, but yes, he used restraint. This time he did not react. He leaned upon the Lord. He leaned upon God's timing and help here. So we see God opened a door through compassion. He put their hurt in His heart, and He stood up for what's right. It's always right to do right. Even though the stars fall, do what is right. Do what's right. It's not so complicated. Do what is right. And our culture wants to try to justify and rationalize sinful behavior, sinful activity, excuse things away. Do right though the stars fall. Do what's right. And that's what Moses did. We see in verses 18 and 19 here that God reward faithful acts of service. Now notice what happens in the story here. And when they had come to Reuel their father, he said, "How is it that you're come so soon today? How did you get everything done and you're already back home so soon?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flocks. And he said unto his daughters, Where is he? Where is it that ye have left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread. Faithful service produces a testimony. Even when we say nothing, someone may hear a sermon. They may or may not hear your sermon, but they will always notice your behavior, your service. Someone has said that the greatest Bible that people will ever read is your life. And there's a lot of truth to that, your testimony. And God uses you even when you're misunderstood and even mislabeled. Moses was labeled as the Egyptian, perhaps because of the clothing that he was wearing. He was mislabeled. He was misidentified. He was a man that God used even though others misunderstood him, who we are or what we're trying to do. When Moses served without seeking anything in return, God took care of him and blessed him. And I'm so thankful for this story in the Bible because it shows us the small moments that have big impacts. You do realize that this one event changed Moses' whole life. One act of kindness. And that can happen in your life too. One act of kindness. I had a dear friend in Hickory, North Carolina. His name was Andre DeBow. Andre DeBow. And he was a legal immigrant here in America. He got here to America. And at that time, when he came, you had to have a U.S. sponsor. When he got stateside, he went to the arrangement with his sponsor, and his sponsor had died the day before. He was looking at being deported back to Holland, and he had no idea how this was all going to shake down. So he said, well, I might as well eat a good American lunch before I go home. He looked around. He didn't want to sit by himself. He looked around. He found a man sitting at a table by himself, went over and had a meal with that man, and that one meal changed his life. That man was a federal judge. And it just so happened, or it happened just so in the course of time, that man took his case, became his mentor, and helped him finish his documentation, becoming a legal citizen here in America. And Andre DeBow lived a very successful life, started DeBow Tech, which is an active company even in Hickory, Charlotte area. You can look up DeBow Tech fiberglass. They make sleds for the U.S. Olympic team. Fiberglass sleds. It's just amazing. But you backtrack all of that man's life and his success, and you find a lunch that took place. Just one day, one encounter. Can that happen in your life? Can that happen in your life? It happened in Tara's life, didn't it? Just at Ingles, you know. Emily invites her to church. Where are you going to church at? Not going anywhere right now. Come on to Bellevue. Comes to Bellevue, hears the gospel. Gets gloriously saved. How about that? Faithful to church, wants to live for God, praying for her family. I'm telling you, friend, that's how God works. That's how He works. Those divine appointments, but guess what? We're too busy. We're in too much of a hurry. I'm watering my own flocks. Leave me alone. Don't want anybody to talk to me. And what happens is we miss those divine appointments that God has for us. You see, at Midian, friend, we got to learn to slow down. We got to learn to see the divine appointment, see the need. Put that compassion in your heart. In those moments, they have big impacts on people's lives. There was a youth event I went to when I was 14 years old. I didn't really want to go on that youth trip, but I went on that youth trip, and on that youth trip, God called me to preach. I thought so many times, I wonder if I would have went to that football event and instead of going to camp, I wonder what my life would be. The night I met my wife at a baseball game, I was supposed to be somewhere else, but I canceled that plan, said I'm just going to go. I'm just telling you, God has divine appointments for us. And we must be sensitive to follow His leading in our life. Number 4, verse number 21, we see contentment is great gain. Wow, what a lesson. Moses was content to dwell with a man, and he gave Moses Zipporah, his daughter, to wife. Now, it's my opinion that Zipporah was the oldest daughter because in ancient times, that's typically what they did. We see that in Jacob's life with Leah and Rachel. Typically, the oldest daughter was married away. May or may not be true, but the fact of the matter is that Moses took Zipporah to be his wife. And the Bible says He was content. He was content. Why does this verse matter? It matters because Moses was content to dwell, and that marks a turning point in this man's life. Because up to this point, he wasn't content. Up to this point, he was trying for more, greater things. We got to get it done. We got to do something different. He was pushing and pushing his agenda and his way and will, and God had to set him down in the backside of nowhere, next to nothing, by a well, so that this man would learn just to be content. Godliness with contentment is great gain, the Bible says. He stopped running. He stopped fighting. He stopped striving. He stopped trying to force God's plan, and he was content. Contentment's a beautiful thing. Because we live in such a world that's discontented. I mean, everywhere around you. That's what marketing's all about. That's what commercials are all about. And I'm going to tell you, the devil's going to try to get you discontent in every area of your life. Your marriage, he's going to try to get you discontent. He's going to try to get you discontent with your job. That guy's making more money doing the same thing. You fool, look at you. Look what you could be doing. And he's always showing us that grass that's greener on the other side, outside of God's will, perhaps. Your phone, your car, every single thing that you got. Constantly, the world, the flesh, and the devil are trying to tell you it's not enough. You deserve better. You deserve more. You deserve this or that. And I'm going to tell you, it is a beautiful day in your life where you say, you know what? I'm good. God, you've been good to me. I am thankful for what you have given to me. And that was Moses. God builds stability before He builds responsibility. God builds stability before He builds responsibility. Before God changes our assignment, He has to change our attitude. He has to help us realize that He's enough, that where He's placed us is enough, that what we have is enough. Teaching us that contentment and patience, they work together in God's plan for us. The devil wants you to think that you're not enough. The devil and the world and the flesh will always tell you that your appearance this and that, and discontentment will destroy your mind, my friend. Learn to be content with what God has given to you. That doesn't mean you don't have goals and desires and ambitions. That's not what we're talking about. We ought to have spiritual drive and hunger to be molded into the image of God. But when it comes to the possessions and things of this world, we ought to live a content life. God, you're enough. You're good enough. What you've given me is enough. And Moses had to learn that because his whole life, all he knew was the next great thing is the prince. Verse 22, Moses learned his true identity. His true identity. We read that Zipporah, she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom. For he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. Now, verse number 22 is very powerful. I don't know exactly what happens when you become a daddy, but something changes. When my wife was expecting for our first son, people would always say, your life's going to be different. Everything's going to be different. And you never could really pin down exactly what that was until it happened. And then you realize, oh, everything's different. I mean, it's entirely different. You can't even put on paper what's different when you become a parent. Your feedings are different, your timetable, your schedule. I mean, your whole life is entirely different. And verse 22 shows us a big transition in Moses' life when he becomes a daddy. Naming a child circumstantially was very common in ancient times. Gershom fits this custom. Gershom became a living memorial of this parenthesis in Moses' life. A stranger in a strange land. The word Gershom, the name means a stranger there. How would you like for that to be your name? Gershom. I'm a stranger there. You know, God bless that guy, I tell you what. But Moses, the key is, Moses now identifies as a pilgrim, not a prince. He identifies as a stranger in this world, in this land. His identity is no longer tied to Egypt or even Midian, but to God's calling. Just as a passport identifies a citizen or a citizenship, Moses learned that his true citizenship was not in Egypt and it wasn't even in Midian. It was in a land that God was going to show him. There was another chapter of God's purpose in his life. God sometimes will lead you to a cul-de-sac. God sometimes will lead you to a dead end so that he can be your only source of the way out. And for Moses, Gershom was him understanding that, man, this world is not my home. I'm just passing through. I'm a stranger here too. Even when you run to the ends of where you think is desolation, even there, God has a plan and God has a next step for you. And God uses the feeling of being a stranger to again strip away self-reliance and absolute dependence upon God. When we no longer feel at home in this world, we learn to feel at home with God. And I think Moses' son's name was based on this experience reshaping his heart, because God uses displacement to develop dependence upon Him. Humility many times grows when we accept our limitations, when we understand that God is shaping us through brokenness. And 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11 is a great cross-reference that we are strangers and pilgrims in this world. This world is not our home, we're just a passing through. Our treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. And Moses in some way realized that Midian wasn't it either. Egypt wasn't it. But guess what, class? Midian wasn't it either. He had learned to be content, yeah, but God was molding him and forming him and having a desire for something more, something greater. God shapens us before He assigns us. We see here, lastly, in verses 23 through 25, a lesson on God's timing. And it came to pass in the process of time. Now, some years have passed between verse 22 and verse 23. It came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. Now notice all the times here that it says God, God, God. While Moses was tending sheep, God was at work behind the scene. God was hearing prayers. God was contrite and turned to His people. He heard their affliction, their cry that was in bondage. The repeated phrase God shows us and emphasizes divine initiative. God hears, God remembers, God sees, God knows. God's people weren't forgotten, and Moses wasn't forgotten. God had a plan for His people. And I think it's good for us to be reminded that God's silence does not mean God's absence. I really hit this point really hard on Sunday, but it's worth mentioning again that God is always at work. His timing is perfect in your life. When you think God's late, you're early. You know, let's wait upon Him, lean upon Him. Trust God even when you don't see progress. God is always at work, even while you're waiting, even when you're on the backside of nowhere next to nothing in Midian. Your Midian is part of God's plan. I've heard people say that Midian was a detour. I submit to you, it was not a detour, it was the development plan of God. Moses was not ready to lead God's people at age 40, at 50, at 60, at 70, at 80. He wasn't ready yet. But in chapter 3, God's going to break through in his life. And Lord willing, next week, we'll begin diving into that call of God upon his life. I'm going to tell you, your bubble gum is going to vibrate. The little hairs are going to stand up on the back of your neck when we unpackage about God's calling upon His people. What Egypt could not teach Moses in 40 years, it took Midian 40 years to prepare him. And if you're going through Midian tonight, enjoy the process and be content. That is our online Bible study tonight. Hope you'll join us next week as we continue our study in the life of Moses. Hope you got a copy of your prayer sheet. Brother Milton is coming to lead us in our prayer time. A number of folks to be praying for. Had a great visit with Sandra Walker today, and she was in the emergency room. She is planning on going to a rehab center soon, Lord willing. They're running a number of tests. If you had time to fill out a prayer request card, if you'd pass it to the inside aisle, and I appreciate Brother Andy collecting those for us. Continue to pray for those having procedures tomorrow. Deb Kynard has outpatient